The Florida Gators football program was one of the more respected programs all the way up from the 90s to the early 2010s. It had College Football Hall of Fame head coaches such as Dteve Spurrier and Urban Meyer. Danny Warfel, Tim Tebow, Percy Harvin, and the Pouncey twins are some of the more legendary players to put on Florida jerseys. And in that time span of having those legendary players, they were able to win 3 national titles, one in 1996, one in 2006, and one in 2008. Ever since Urban Meyer decided to retire after the 2010 college football season, Florida has struggled to get back to that mountaintop. And where Florida has had some successful seasons between 2011 and the current day, it's just not what Florida fans were accustomed to between the 90s and the late 2000s. But as I record this, in the 2024 college football season, Florida is 0-3, and their third-year head coach Billy Napier is about to get fired. So let's take a look at how we got here. If I could describe the Dteve Spurrier era of Florida football in a couple words, I would say great with a lot of success and not many lows. Spurrier during his tenure at Florida will have 122 wins, 27 losses, and 1 tie. Spurrier will post an 82-12 record in conference play, and during his Florida tenure, every Florida team that he had was ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season, ranking in the top 3 times in his Florida tenure, including a number 1 finish in 1996, and the lowest a Florida Dteve Spurrier team ranked at the end of the season is number 12. So Spurrier would take Florida to new heights that Florida fans had never seen before. And unlike some coaches when they get a new head coaching job, Spurrier didn't struggle really at all. Through his first 5 seasons, Spurrier would post records of 9-2, 10-2, 9-4, 11-2, and 10-2-1. If there was one knock on Dteve Spurrier's early tenure at Florida, it would be his inability to avoid losing that 1 game or 2 games that held them out of a national title appearance. Some years they will lose to Auburn, some years they will lose to Alabama and Florida State, or that 1 year they lost to Syracuse. It just seemed like Dteve Spurrier teams couldn't get over the hump. That was until the year 1995. In 95, Spurrier and Florida would dominate the SEC, beating number 8 Tennessee, number 21 LSU, number 7 Auburn, number 6 Florida State, and number 23 Arkansas. This Florida team would score 34 points or more in every game, and they would average 41 points per game this season. Sadly, they would run into the 90s buzzsaw that was the Nebraska Cornhuskers, and they would get blown out 62-24 in the national title game. The 96 season was similar to 95, as they would beat number 2 Tennessee, they would beat number 12 LSU, number 16 Auburn, but they would lose to Florida State 21-24. Florida would then beat number 11 Alabama in the SEC title game. Then they would see Florida State again in the national title game, where they would win 52-20. The head ball coach would then spend 5 more seasons at Florida, and his last 5 seasons were similar to his first 5 seasons. His teams would post records of 10-2, 10-2, 9-4, 10-3, and 10-2. One underrated thing about Dteve Spurrier's tenure at Florida was his fun and gun offense, where Florida is the only team in college football history to score over 500 points in 4 consecutive years. At Florida, Dteve Spurrier will win 1 national title, have 2 national title appearances, win 6 SEC championships, and be named SEC Coach of the Year 5 times. After 12 years as Florida head coach, Spurrier would then decide to resign and opt to go to the NFL. Florida AD at the time, Jeremy Foley, would try to go after Denver Broncos head coach Mike Shanahan or Oklahoma's head coach Bob Stoops, but they both decided to stay where they were, so he had to hire Ron Zook. Now, Zook didn't have no head coaching experience up to this point, but he was familiar with Florida as he was their DC under Spurrier from 91 to 93, and then in 94 and 95 he was an associate head coach / special teams coordinator. Zook will also have some NFL experience when he was hired, as he was a DC for the New Orleans Saints and he was a DB coach for the Kansas City Chiefs. But this was still a risky hire for Florida, as the 2 guys they tried to go after, Stoops and Shanahan, were both head coaches, and the guy that just resigned was a head coach before he became Florida head coach. Since Ron Zook was familiar with Florida, he was a coordinator under Spurrier for multiple years, it wasn't the worst hire that they could have made, but it was still risk involved. And that risk that Florida AD Jeremy Foley took did not come with a reward. Zook would spend 3 years as Florida head coach, where his final record would be 23-14. See, Zook had a lot of lows and not a lot of highs as a head coach at Florida. Dteve Spurrier only had 5 home losses in his 12 years as the Gators head coach, while Ron Zook already had 5 going into his 3rd season. That would include the 41-16 loss in Zook's first season as the Gators head coach. Not only did Zook fail to maintain home field advantage, but he also struggled against really good teams as he had a 6-12 win-loss record against ranked teams. You throw that in with the fact that he went 8-5 in his first 2 seasons, and in his third season he went 7-4, and he had no bowl game wins. Well, Zook got fired. Now Florida's AD knew that they had to make a home run hire as the next head coach if they wanted to get back to them Dteve Spurrier levels. In the 2005 offseason, Florida decided to hire Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer was a hot commodity when it came to being a head coach at a big university, as not only was Florida looking to hire him in the offseason, Notre Dame was as well. At his previous head coaching spots, he proved to be a winner as he went 8-3 and 9-3, posting a 17-6 record as Bowling Green's head coach. Then Meyer would go to Utah, where he would post a 22-2 record, going 10-2, then 12-0, and winning the Liberty and Fiesta Bowl in back-to-back seasons. But we know Florida was a different spot, as you had to win, and you had to win early to maintain a head coaching job there. And win early he did, as his first season he went 9-3 and Florida won the Outback Bowl, and on top of that he didn't lose a home game that whole season. Going into the 2006 season, they would bring in guys such as Tebow, Brandon Spikes, and Percy Harvin, who would become faces of the future Florida football teams with Urban Meyer being the head coach. That 2006 season was something magical for the Gators, as they went 12-1 in the regular season, including beating 4 ranked teams. Now they did lose to number 11 Auburn, but they still were able to make the BCS National Championship game. In that game, they would play the Ohio State Buckeyes, where they would beat them 41-14, and Florida would have their first national championship in a decade. And despite being questioned about his passing ability, Tebow was named the starter going into the 07 season. And Tebow seemed to shut critics up in the first game, as against Western Kentucky, he would go 13 for 17 for 300 yards. And by the end of the season, Tebow won the Heisman Trophy, the Maxwell Award, was named first team All-SEC, and he broke multiple SEC records. But while he had a good individual season, the team kind of struggled. Florida would go 9-4, including going 2-2 in ranked games, and they would lose the first home game of the Urban Meyer era. But the 08 season, Florida, Meyer, and Tebow would bounce back in a big way, as they would go 13-1, including beating 4 ranked top 10 teams, and they would make it back to the BCS National Championship game, where they would play Oklahoma and they would beat them 24-14. And the 09 season looked about the same, as they dominated every opponent. They would be ranked number 1 going into the SEC Championship game, and they were ranked number 1 through all weeks but 1 during that whole season. Unfortunately, in the SEC Championship game, little did everybody know that that was the start of the Alabama dynasty, as Alabama would beat Florida 32-12. While this was a start for Alabama, this was the end for Urban Meyer in Florida. Florida would beat Cincinnati in the Sugar Bowl, but the next season they would go 8-5, and they lost every ranked game that they had on their schedule, and Urban Meyer at the end of the season retired. Almost forgot to mention that they weren't ranked by the end of the season as well, so yeah, they kind of fell off a cliff. Urban Meyer would post a record of 65-15 during his time as Florida head coach. He will win every bowl game but 1. He would have 2 national titles. He would have a Heisman Trophy winner. Most importantly, he made the Swamp feel like the Swamp again, as he had only 5 home losses in his 6 seasons there. Although it wasn't all good, as there were reports that he created a toxic culture at Florida. See, it was this thing called the Urban Meyer Circle of Trust, where it only included star players, and they got favorable treatment, as they didn't have to complete workouts, they got lenient punishment, and they were high positive drug tests from the public. But now with Urban Meyer gone, they have to make the right coaching hire to maintain that national championship level. Now let's get into the downfall of Florida. After Urban Meyer left, they decided to hire Will Muschamp, who up until that point also had no head coaching experience, just like Ron Zook, but he was a DC at multiple stops. And at the beginning of the Muschamp era, it didn't look good for Florida, as they went 7-6 in his first year and 3-5 in conference play, and this would be the first losing conference record that they would have since 1979. Muschamp knew that the next season, him and Florida would have to perform really well for him to remain off the hot seat. And in 2012, Florida would go 11-2. They would have 4 ranked wins over BCS top 12 teams. The only problem is that they couldn't score. They would score no touchdowns against Georgia, and by the end of the season, they would have the 97th ranked offense in the nation. And this would be a reoccurring problem for Muschamp-led Florida teams. This problem will rear its ugly head again in 2013 as they would start 4-1, but then they would drop 7 straight, ending the season 4-8. And at the end of the season, the offense ranked 114th nationally, which is one of the worst offenses in Florida history. So at the end of every full season that he coached at Florida, his offense ranked 98th, 97th, and 114th. In 2014, after a 5-5 start through the first 11 games, he would then resign as a head coach from Florida. And he would acknowledge that he was given every opportunity to succeed at Florida. He just didn't, and that's on him. After much chant, Florida decided to hire Jim McElwain, who before becoming a head coach at Florida, he was a head coach at Colorado State. McElwain would spend 3 seasons at Colorado State, where he would have 2 winning seasons, winning 8 and 10 games. And he would have an overall record of 22-16 while being the head coach for Colorado State. And after the first 2 years at Florida, it looked like a really great hire because his record in his first 2 years was 10-4 and 9-4. What made those 2 seasons look even better on paper was the fact that they were ranked at the end of the season on both of those seasons, and they made it to the SEC championship in back-to-back years. A problem for McElwain, though, was the fact that he struggled against ranked teams as he had a 4-9 win and loss record against ranked teams. What made it look even worse is that in 2016, they had a collapse against Tennessee, and they had blowout losses to Arkansas, Florida State, and Alabama. In 2017, McElwain and Florida got off to a 3-4 start, and then McElwain was fired. The story of how McElwain got fired starts on October 23rd when McElwain went to the press and said that his family and his team received death threats. And Florida didn't exactly back McElwain up, as they came out and said that they had a meeting with him and that McElwain gave them no additional details. This will cause more tension between McElwain and the University of Florida, and this tension was already brewing since early in McElwain's tenure. Then on October 28th, there were already rumors that Florida was about to buy out McElwain's contract. 24 hours after a 42-7 loss to Georgia, McElwain and Florida would start discussing buyout options. And I couldn't exactly find how much the buyout was, but it is rumored that his buyout went from $12 million down to $4 million. After Randy Shannon coached a couple of games, they decided to hire Dan Mullen, who was a coach at Mississippi State. Mullen would spend 9 seasons at Mississippi State, going 69-46, and in that 2014 season, if you remember, he even had Mississippi State ranked #1, with the quarterback being Dak Prescott. And it looked like Florida found a coach of the future, as his first 2 years, Mullen would go 10-3 and 11-2, and he would be second in the East Division of the SEC Conference. Mullen will also have Florida ranked in the top 10 at the end of both of those seasons, and he would win the Peach Bowl and Orange Bowl. In 2020, it looked like they had a chance to make it to the playoffs though, as they had Kyle Pitts, they had Kyle Trask, and they had Kadarius Toney. In that season, from September 26th to December 11th, they will only have 1 loss, that being the Texas A&M, and all they had to do was beat a struggling LSU team and beat one of the greatest Alabama teams of all time, and then make it to the playoffs. But against LSU, they looked like they were about to win, and then Marco Wilson took a LSU offensive player's shoe off and threw it downfield, which caused a penalty. LSU would then kick a field goal for the win. Then Florida dropped the game to Alabama, and then they dropped a bowl game to Oklahoma. In this 4th season, things didn't go as well as the previous seasons, as they started out 5-6, and then Mullen was fired. To fill the head coaching vacancy, they would then hire Billy Napier, who was the head coach of Louisiana, and there he would have a winning season each year, including 3 straight seasons of 10+ wins. In his first season, Billy Napier will underachieve, as they would go 6-7. He would have 6 players drafted, but they could never build off that season. Last season, Florida was going 5-7, and this meant going into this season, he was already on the hot seat. And before this season, you had the head ball coach, Dteve Spurrier, call out Billy Napier's Florida football program. And if you didn't know, going into this season, Florida was going to have arguably the hardest schedule in college football. And right now, Florida and Billy Napier are currently sitting at 1-2, with Mississippi State being the next opponent. And with the way the schedule is set up, Billy Napier probably won't make it through the season. There are already talks of Billy Napier possibly getting fired, and then fans also want Urban Meyer back. Urban Meyer has since shot down the rumors that he will become Florida's head coach if Billy Napier is fired during the season. But it does seem Florida is going to be on a head coaching hunt either in late 2024 or early in 2025. Florida was able to make great hires in Dteve Spurrier and Urban Meyer, as those 2 coaches brought them national championships. Those 2 coaches have produced multiple NFL draft picks, multiple All-Americans at Florida, but outside of Meyer and Spurrier, there hasn't really been a good consistent coach at Florida. They went through past coordinators under those guys. They went through coaches that had no connection to Florida, and it still hasn't worked out. Some people believe that the next head coach would be Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, or Fran Brown, who's at Syracuse, but y'all let me know down in the comment section who y'all think it will be. That's all for this video. Until next time, I'm out. Peace.